so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life, well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the one who will be here with you each and every Wednesday, interviewing a different consciousness changemaker that is also out there working tirelessly to help catalyze change and expand awareness all across Spaceship Earth. On the other 4 weekdays, you can hear me discussing topics such as my favorite thought-provoking quotes, reading and discussing wisdom from empowering books, playing clips from various inspirational spiritual teachers, sharing a bit of mysterious news, taking questions from the audience, and essentially digging into any other mind-expansive topics that will help keep your soul fed by tuning you into positive vibrations on a consistent basis. And you guys have heard me say that if I ever run ads on the show, it will only be with a company that I fully support because I believe their intention is to make a positive difference in the world. Well, I'm pleased to announce that day has arrived and that this episode of the Positive Head Podcast is being brought to you thanks to the support of Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's interview episode, I'm very happy to have Noah Lampert here with me on the show. Noah is definitely a man after my own heart. Not only is Noah a podcaster, but his show is dedicated to examining the subtle realities that connect us all, and is called Synchronicity. Hey there, Noah. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah. I'm maybe a little bit mad that you stole my the name of my podcast, what I wanted to call it. No, just kidding.
You can blame my wife.
Know. Yeah, exactly. As my listeners know, I'm such a nerd for good stories of synchronicity. And of course, that's sort of a go-to question. I have a few canned questions that I always ask, and that is one of them, for all my guests. Give me a juicy story of synchronicity. So you better have something good or you're no pressure.
I don't even know what synchronicity is. I just like the word.
Poser.
I have plenty of examples of synchronicity in my life. One of the reasons, truthfully, the real reason I named the show that, my wife came up with the name knowing that I'm a big Carl Jung fan. He popularized the term. He didn't really coin it, but he popularized it way back when. And I have always found the word to have, special meaning in my life because there's been points where they're, punctuated singular incidents of synchronicity. And then there's also been experiences where those synchronicities seemingly merge into each other over an extended period of time.
The multi-leveled, layered onion that keeps on peeling.
Exactly. And, what's cool about it is, as you know, when you ask people questions related to synchronicity, the layers just get deeper and deeper and can extend over really long periods of time, even long before we were born, which is always a fascinating thing to me. It's atemporal, so it's not based in time. So what, am I supposed to give you a synchronicity? I can give you.
Well, you know what? Why don't you hold that for a moment? Yeah. Hold those stories, and I'll take as many as you got, by the way. But let's start. What I'd like to do before we dig into all that juiciness is get a little bit of your back. Well, okay, so I always typically start with the same question. Okay. You're in an elevator. You got 10 floors to answer. The guy next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" What do you say?
Normalizing, quote unquote, spiritual concepts that otherwise people wouldn't be talking about. That's my passion.
I like that. I definitely can relate to that one. Okay, well, tell us a little bit. How does one end up in with that as their passion? What's the background? What's going on here? Who's Noah?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
You're still trying to figure that one out yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's something I don't have totally pinned down. I mean, in a relatively roundabout way. I mean, the side answer to that question too is I'm extremely passionate about music, and that has kind of been like a guiding compass that has put me in situations where I was able to learn and be around people who, were interested in inner development. So I think the more you hang around with people who are earnestly and authentically trying to do that, the more it kind of creeps in and becomes your driving passion, as it has in my case. And I also just to qualify it, I don't want to be too highfalutin about it either. That's a kind of a weird, ostentatious answer to the elevator question. It's well, what do you mean normalizing quote unquote spiritual concept? I'm already putting, air quotes in this stuff. And I really do think, it comes down to having practical benefits, as you know. That to me is where, the magic meets the reality. And I think, the more people are talking and engaging and thinking and being aware of some of these things, which I'm alluding to very secretly, I think that's a good thing. So that's why I would say, it's kind of my passion. It's not something I wake up and think that's my mantra every day. And I'm sure another answer to that question I could have given is depends which day and which elevator. But I do, you know what I mean? But I do think that is generally kind of the underlying current is, we can talk about things like death, synchronicity, life, consciousness, awareness, suffering, surrender, all of these things regularly and have them in our lexicon, and being able to approach them. That's a good thing. So that's why I settled on that as my ostentatious answer.
Yeah. And how long have you been going down this path of exploring the mysteries, so to speak?
Yeah, another good question. I mean, it feels like, truthfully, for my entire life, from when I can remember, just doing different thought experiments and perceiving the world as a young kid, all the way up to where I am now, including the psychedelic days. And, things have had a way of finding me, it feels like a lot of the time. A book will appear at the right time. A person will tell me about something at the perfect time, and not just related to, spiritual concepts, but just music or art or anything. And in a lot of the cases, it feels distinctly like remembering rather than learning or gaining or, getting something from out there. So, to that sense, as long as I've been aware of the intuitive faculties, that exist in all of us, especially in myself, I think probably, long before I was born. But it's been with me most of my life as well.
Yeah. How long have you been doing your podcast?
Only a couple of years, a little over a couple, actually not even a couple of years, close to 2 years at the end of this one. And man, I'm
2 years, right now. It's I think it was this week. I looked at my first review the other day, and it was a negative review. It was this is a hack. And it was May 19th. And I think we're recording this as the 17th. So yeah.
Oh, amazing. Those negative.
I'm still hacking away.
I got to say, for a hack, man, you're pretty dedicated to do this. And you do it a lot. Podcasting it's just, I was talking about someone else we're going to be adding to Mindpod Network, and it really is such an interesting practice, both creatively, intrapersonally, relationally. Yeah. It's so interesting. And being on both sides of it, right now I have the pleasure of being a guest, but when you're on the flip side, it's a whole other dynamic, and it really just teaches you a lot, I think, about listening and other things that I don't think I would have picked up otherwise. So I love it, man.
I love it too. Yeah, it's definitely suits me and my desire to explore these topics and to sort of get things off of my chest. I mean, if I, going back to my first episode, it's like, I'm doing this so that my poor friends and family can, I can stop their ears from bleeding from me, just berating them with all this information. So, it's definitely an outlet. And I was talking to a friend this weekend who is very passionate about, his perspectives on the ultimate nature of reality and consciousness and what we're here to do. And he's just so lit up with it. And then his girlfriend got sort of agitated with him. And, he's like, oh, she's a little agitated. I'm not giving her attention. He's like, but she doesn't understand, like, being able to have this conversation with someone, as me and another friend. He's like, it's like therapy for me. It's like this release that I need to get out because, and I started thinking about it. I was like, man, I can really relate to that. It's like when you're wired, it's like what you came here to do. And if you don't, you're not fulfilling. It's like this bottled up energy that you have to release in some way. And I think that's hard for some people to understand, freaks like us.
No, it's, I think as hard as it may be for some people, it's not hard for a lot of people, because I think whatever that energy you're describing there, whether it's talking about, conversation, topics and metaphysical things and spiritual things or whatever it is, intellectual, that same type of energy builds up in everyone in varying degrees. And some people let it off, through drugs, through, meditation. There's any number of ways to kind of do that. And I'm beginning to realize, at least for me, with the podcasting taught me this. I'm a musician as well, but I never put out creative work musically on a regular basis. But with the podcast, I do. And seeing how that consistency creatively release that energy, what you're talking about, really has been just such a catalyst for so many other aspects of my life. And I think that's a lot of the dysfunction and disharmony that's in the world here is from that energy that you're describing not having proper outlets. And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't just have to be about the stuff we're talking about. If you're into cars or dinosaurs or whatever, like that could be it. But that communication, that creative communication is really important for people to express.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you make an excellent point. I think of my own brother, who we're 2 years apart in age. We've always been very close, our whole lives, business partners. And, we have definitely our differences and interests and so forth at this point in our life. But, we're still very close. And, I think of the difference between us. I am someone who lets it all out. I don't hold anything close to my chest. It's like, it just, for better or for worse, it's coming out. And he's someone who is very empathic and very, I'm a Leo, he's a Cancer. So, just the differences there. And he keeps it very close to him, and it sort of bottles up and has trouble processing energies around him. He takes them all on. And as a result, it's caused, anxiety and heart palpitations and, different anxiety attacks at different times. Whereas I have none of that. And I think it's you can see the difference in, just the way we're wired sort of benefits me that I let it all out. And I think that's important for everyone to do. If you're bottling anything up, good or bad, it's meant to sort of flow through you. And I think for some of us, it's naturally easier than others though, too.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting. I'm a Cancer.
Okay.
But I consider myself an extroverted introvert.
That's right. Your birthdays are a day apart. I remember we talked about birthdays because you fall in my family birthday week, where I attract so many people that are within this week, and 4 out of 5 family members. And right when you and I were first talking, I was like, "Oh, your birthday week material." No wonder we have so many similarities.
So I have a synchronicity for you. I just hung out with my neighbor. We just moved here a few months ago, and we hung out really for the first time last night. And his birthday is, I think, July 24th. So within the range. I'm the 20th.
That's my mom's. Yeah, my mom is the 24th.
I remember there was one of them that was on that date. So, that period of time is very interesting. And as you know, at least I'm not totally well-versed in astrology and astrological concepts, but Cancer and Leo are next to each other. I'm the 20th.
Cusp.
So I'm kind of
right
close
there,
to the cusp of the Leo. Yep. Exactly. And my mom is the 25th. Who's firmly in Leo. So I know what you mean, but back to the point of being able to express or, really that is such a crucial thing. And I think bottling that up or pushing it away or grasping onto it in a weird way too, is just a very destructive act that a lot of us, including myself, don't even realize that we're doing unconsciously. Like to us, it just may feel like something's a little bit off, or like I'm having a cranky day, or how dare that person. But it really is that energy release. And then also learning how to release it in a way that's productive for you and the people around you. That's the other component. Because if you just like, if your way of releasing energy is punching people in the face and you don't have like a disciplined MMA practice or something, you're an asshole. Don't do that.
That's like my brother. He could hold it on, and then all of a sudden he blows up, and you're like, whoa, where did that come from?
I do that too. Yeah, I do that too. That's such a cancerian thing. It's horrible. Yeah. It's a horrible trait.
Wow. Yeah. So your mom's the 25th, you said. So I have a very significant ex-partner who led to 2 relationships actually that I met on my birthday, the 28th, and she's the 25th. So, whoa, it's like so much overlap. And then I have someone who's now staying with me who's the 31st. I've connected with someone who I was actually referencing earlier with the girlfriend is the 30th. So it's like, it's just so much in that week. It's wild. Yeah, what a trip.
I love it.
Energy is a funny, funny thing, especially when you start, of course, connecting the dots and really paying attention. And the more you pay attention, the more you see. And of course, that's the whole concept of synchronicity. And I was listening to one of your, I forget who you were talking to. I was listening to one of your recent episodes, and he was talking about how synchronicity being sort of the jumping off point. I want to say maybe it was the Jason Louv guy. He was talking about how synchronicity is sort of a jumping off point for people who are waking up to these ideas, and it really is. Once you start paying attention, it gets. I mean, this is great that your podcast is Synchronicity, and we have like so much going on right out of the gate figuring out.
Well, the quote, the Carl Jung quote: "Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see," and that truthfully is. I have had that sentiment and thought and quote backed up with direct experience. And that is to say, if we were all knowing and omnipresent and omni-knowing of everything, we would experience everything as one giant synchronicity. We would see how everything is interconnected, not just conceptually, but actually. But when you have these synchronicities, which I love you to, it's the jumping off point, like when something is just like way too weird, right? And it's just like doesn't fit within your concept of reality. You always have the choice of brushing it off. Some of us, like, myself included, who maybe need a more, direct pointing out of things, when they just start happening nonstop, you eventually have to just be like, okay, what's going on here? Like, how is this stuff happening? Because this is too weird. And then I think, like you said, once you start probing, whatever you want to call the mystery is collective unconscious, God, energy, being, there's many different perspectives to look at it through. Yes, source, exactly. Once you start probing, you're going to get a reaction. It's how everything works. And, it's a good idea, I think, generally, although not necessary, to have some idea of, the metaphysical properties at play here. So because I've definitely poked around with the unconscious, the collective unconscious, to provoke certain results. And sure enough, if I didn't know what I was doing, I would start getting really weird dreams. They would start crossing over into reality. Crazy shit would start happening. I wouldn't feel that I had a tremendous amount of control over it. But when you learn how to approach some of this stuff with a little more awareness and clarity, then it can actually really be a pretty amazing thing, especially for working through which are issues that we have, which we all have.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yes. Which we're all here to work through, I would say, in general. Agreed. It's sort of
Yes, I agree with that.
So, but it's so nice to have those, this other layer of sort of assistance, if you will, once you start paying attention to the pattern, pattern recognition and taking it to another level, noticing the synchronicities, noticing the connection between people and energies coming into your life. It's a wonderful thing to sort of have that tool to rely on. It's like, well, there's a lot of things pointing the arrow this direction. Follow the breadcrumbs, right?
Yes. So what you're talking about, I'm releasing an episode today that is with this dude Jerry Brown, who wrote a book with his wife called The Psychedelic Gospels, which essentially very empirically and very rigorously from an academic standpoint makes a pretty compelling case that Amarita, muscaria, and psilocybin were fundamental in the forming of Christianity and Jesus in particular.
wow.
And they don't just do this from like some like high, like hippie, yeah, man, like this is how it was. Like, they go to like
George Washington took mushrooms, man.
Exactly. No, they go to like Rosslyn Chapel. They go all over Europe, all over the Mediterranean, and find imagery, like distinct down to the genus and like specific thing that this stuff is embedded in this imagery. It's amazing. But the reason I bring it up is
wow.
He pointed out, because this is such a crazy thing to talk about, like what Jesus was doing mushrooms, and like that's where this compassionate wave of wisdom. And I've had some mushroom experiences that certainly align and validate that for me. But from an academic standpoint, this guy is a professor. This guy is not some, weirdo out here just like coming up with theories on his own after he took some acid sometime. He basically had a vested interest in proving this. But what was really a big validator for him and his wife as they kind of stepped off this cliff into this crazy unknown territory is how many synchronicities started popping up, and the way they described those as clear validators that they were on the right path. And that to me is a very practical function of synchronicity, rather than just like some phenomenon like, whoa, what the fuck was that? It's like there is a practical function for this stuff too.
Right. Wow. Yeah. You've definitely had some cool guests. I need to go through and look at a few. That sounds like one of them to invite on this show, because that sounds like an absolutely fascinating topic of discussion.
Insane.
I look forward to hearing it. Yeah. So I was listening to one of your episodes. Like I said, I listened to a few yesterday, and I was listening to the one. What's his name? It's maybe Todd. I can't remember. I should have written it down. But he was talking, the astrology guy, and he was talking about Saturn return. Adam. Yeah, he was really good too. And it was funny because he was talking about the idea of Saturn return, and how the 7-year mark. And it's funny because with my business, I have a travel company. It's exactly 7 years right now, and there's some really interesting things happening. And I was listening to that, and he was saying, it's sort of like the trophy year. It's like you can look and see, what have you accomplished? Where is it? What's this sort of next jumping off point? And I was like, he started talking about 7 years. I started thinking, how long ago was that? And I was like, oh my gosh, it is 7 years. Like right now, it's 2 years right now with the podcast, but 7 years with that. So it's pretty interesting, interesting thought. And it was a very interesting conversation you guys had.
Yeah, I mean, what I liked about that particular one is that we really delved into this concept of the music of the spheres and how these planets and celestial bodies really create these patterns that are observable. And if you believe in certain energetic principles, it's not just like, oh, well, I'm a Cancer, I'm like this. Oh, you're a Leo, you're like this. But there is a very sophisticated way of looking at the celestial bodies to glean information about times and all of this stuff. To me really boils down to, in some way, the concept of time and number, which I think is a big archetype. Like number has Marie-Louise Montbrun's, a translator of Carl Jung, has stated, and she was a proponent of the idea that number is like one of the primordial archetypes. That's something that we can use to latch onto, that reveals itself to us, not only in synchronicity, but just in a variety of ways. And kind of getting to the energetic principles behind number and astrology. Like that's fascinating. I really don't know a ton about astrology. Like I don't either. I know the basics. Exactly. But Jyotish, which is the Vedic astrological stuff. I had a reading done a few years ago, the only astrology reading I've ever had. And that was one of the eeriest, spot on. And they use the lunar cycle. So it's all based on the moon, which is a much more rapid and like fine-tuned cycle. And I just find that stuff to be like, they're all templates and maps of the terrain. And if you can use any of them consciously and mindfully, like, oh, that's so awesome. Like, that's like, why wouldn't we use these things?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I find it all very fascinating. I'm certainly no expert on any of it, but I had a friend introduce me to, it's sort of a combination of astrology and numerology, destiny cards. Have you ever seen destiny card readings? 2 card readings that I had never heard about before. I just heard about the past month. One is the destiny cards, which I don't know a lot about, and one are the last month cards. Okay.
Yeah, now I'm not familiar with Oracle cards. Of those. Oracle cards are essentially coming up with your own symbols for tarot. So you basically create your own cards that you then use
like
for
that.
divination. Pretty cool.
Ooh, that's cool. Yeah. That's
What are
very
Destiny
cool.
cards? No, I want to know more about that.
Destiny is like basically taking the 52 cards of, a normal card deck, and each birthday, has its own special card, or it's like sort of like its sun sign. Like I'm the King of Hearts, so you could be anything. Anything that you could be a 6 of diamonds. You could be and then it has like sort of the sub cards. Your karma card and a few others that are less significant, I suppose, than your primary birth card. But it's like a combination of numerology, astrology, and it was pretty interesting. My friend kind of turned me on to them, and so I find all those things very, very fascinating. Haven't really studied and become an expert by any means in any of it, but it's a pretty interesting. So you should check it out. You can go and of course Google and find pretty quickly what yours is, and see how accurate it seems.
I like the idea of divination. It's one of the things I enjoy about the I Ching. And I'm not a master of the I Ching at all, but I understand certain principles. But the way that the Chinese especially relate to number, like I told a story on one of the episodes of Synchronicity that has always stuck with me. And there was an ancient roundtable discussion between a province, a Chinese emperor, and a warring province basically next door. Then they were deciding whether they should go to battle. So they took a vote, and the vote was 6-3 to go to war. So they decided not to go to war. And the reason they decided not to go to war is because 3 was a more auspicious number for harmony than 6 was. So they chose the qualitative significance of 3 as the more important value structure, which, for us in the West on the decimal system, that makes no fucking sense. It's like, what? Democracy, people? You know what I mean? Like, what are you talking about? Logic here? Like, what are you doing? But there are different ways of relating to all this stuff. And divination, whether it's destiny cards, yarrow sticks with the I Ching, or whatever you're going to use,
numerology,
just popping open a numerology, gematria, popping open a random page in a book and seeing if it speaks to you. These speak to these situations that penetrate kind of the veil of time and space, which I think is always accessible to us if we know kind of how to interpret it. And I think not a prerequisite, but something that helps with this is like you have to clear those goggles that a lot of us have on that might be covered with shit. If you can't see clearly, it's hard to use a lot of these things, because you might just be doing confirmation bias. You might just be, hoping, the eeny, meeny, miny, mo, making sure you start on the right one so you end up with the right, person. So, I do think all of these things have tremendous value if we understand kind of the energetic principles behind them. Absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely quite the rabbit hole once you opt to go down it. And so let's talk a little bit about your network that you're putting together, which I'm excited to join and participate, the Mindpod Network. Yeah, man. Mindpod Network is a very interesting, fun, rewarding, fulfilling, frustrating, difficult, happy thing. I mean, it's everything that I think. Are you describing life? Yeah, I mean, that's what it really is. I mean, that's what it feels like. I mean, essentially, as you know, it's a podcast network of thinkers, creatives, artists who are talking about a lot of the things we're talking about in this conversation, but from a variety of different perspectives. So there's, comedic perspective, artist perspective, a technology perspective, a layman's perspective, all of these, a Buddhist perspective, all of these different ways to kind of circumambulate the same thing, but from different ways. And, the real idea behind it is to curate and get a really great group of people together who are trying to, improve the lives of those around them. And whether that means directly in their life, which it certainly does, or extends out to, online and podcasts and other places, really forming a web and community here of people who I think can approach this stuff in a way that doesn't feel like forced either. In the same way that we're naturally having a conversation about this, you put out this little beacon, and if people want to tune into it, they will. They don't have to. It's not like you have to join this thing and do that thing. So that's essentially what Mindpod Network is. And I'm, it has gone through several different incarnations in its relatively short lifespan since November of 2014. But right now, I couldn't be happier with like the people, yourself included, who are a part of the team. And, we're really trying to turn it into something that serves a lot of people.
Yeah, I love the idea. I love the content that you've curated. It's definitely, if you guys, any of you liking this show, I assume most of you like this show since you're listening. Definitely check out Mindpod Network. Positive Head is going to be joining up, and actually probably by the time this comes out, you'll see Positive Head shows on there. And how many different podcasts are affiliated now?
That is a wonderful question. I think by the end of May, we're going to be up to 15. I think right now we're at 12 or 13. We just added 2 this week. Adam, who you mentioned with his Exploring Astrology podcast, he was just added. He's been podcasting, by the way, since 2008. It's like, wow. Whoa. You're way ahead of the game. Sommer. Adam Sommer.
The one name. The astrology guy. Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about
the astrology dude. So we just added him. We added another awesome female lady, wonderful person, Ellie Aaron, which I'm really happy about. And we're actually adding some other women coming up. We're trying to make it as diverse as possible. We don't want this to just turn into, the same club thing you would see all the time. Yeah, the boys club, the white boys club at that too. You know what I mean?
Right. Totally. I definitely don't help with that aim then.
Yeah, exactly. And then, there's I got into a great conversation with a cab driver from the Bronx the other day when I was going back home, and I don't know how we got into it, but we were just talking about like race relations and epigenetics and like a 15-minute cab ride. And I was telling him, no bones about it. Like, I'm a white guy who is afforded a middle-class family, a tremendous amount of privileges, access, things that other people just don't get. And I use that not as something to feel bad about and be like, oh, fuck, that's fucked up. But to be like, okay, let's use this, run with this torch to talk about shit that's actually important, regardless of race and gender, be open to as many different things as possible, and like use the mantle and kind of the platform to like change that. So we don't have an inordinate amount of control. So I, do view it as the privilege that it is, and, want to use it as kind of a means to help other people who don't look like me. So, yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. You have people sometimes who really get hung up on sort of what's wrong with the world. And there's so much to focus on if we want to focus on what's wrong with the world. And certainly you or I aren't going to be able to relate to some of the struggles that so many go through without the privilege that we've experienced. But, if we focus only on, like you said, like, oh man, I should feel bad about this. I think there's Esther Hicks Abraham has a quote I pulled up here. You can't get sick enough to help sick people get better. You can't get poor enough to help poor people thrive. It's only in your thriving that you have anything to offer anyone. And so I think you have the right idea. How do I leverage this ridiculous system that is thankfully getting new light shed on it? How do I help shed more light on it? How do I, help to break down any of those barriers? I don't know if you've seen, I love this, it kind of went viral clip here in the last few weeks of a white supremacist on this talk show. And, I didn't recognize the host, but a black woman. And then there was another woman there as a guest who was in the, kind of the traditional African garb. And so you had the two opposing factions. You have the white supremacist and this African woman, and they do a DNA test on the white supremacist guy. Yes. Oh, it's so funny. I love it. I just love the woman's laugh. How the one woman is just cackling like when they return his DNA results. It's like 15%, African, and she's like, "Oh, what's up, brother?" It's so good.
So funny. I mean, and it's just really, talking about the ridiculousness of, the race being something that would define people and actually something that really,
pigment,
plays. Yeah. Pigment. I mean, like, we're all so much more interconnected than we would ever possibly imagine. And anything that you're going to be doing out there to someone else that's not cool, realize you're just doing it to yourself. And it's you may not see the exact chain of events or circumstances that prove that, but know that it's true. Like, there's that's literally how it works. And you know, there's no escaping it either. So it is ridiculous that these things, and, you know, back to the Mindpod Network thing, we're trying to, you know, really make sure that we honor as many voices as we can, you know, because it's like, we want this to be, we don't want it just to be as many perspectives as possible from people who are like this. That doesn't make sense. Yeah. That's not what we're talking about. So that is kind of a big focus of ours. Is when I say normalizing this shit, I mean for everyone, you know, theoretically, and we'll scale it up as we can, but really we want this to be universally accessible.
Yeah, that's a wonderful aim to keep, you know, sort of foundationally as you're building it out and as it continues to thrive and grow. I think that's a very important piece to consider and build into it. All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting this podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on the show Missing Links, the incredible researcher Greg Braden explores all the biggest questions concerning who we are, where we come from, where we're going, by connecting the missing links between science and spirituality to complete our understanding of humanity's history and to better understand the interconnectedness of all things. Awesome, right? And that's just one example. As you guys constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out.
Yeah, you're not going to believe this. So Brandon knows that I moved to the garage to escape a bee that was in my office.
Is it now? Is it now?
I mean, if this is the same bee, fuck this bee. But if it's not, then I just think there's bees all over the place. But it's not really giving me a hard time. But if you do at any point hear me spaz out and
like a little girl,
that's what that is. It's not just an episode I'm having.
It's so funny. Yeah,
I'm not going to run.
So before we started recording, he's like, "Okay, I'm kind of a baby. There's a bee in, you know, where I normally record, so I moved to my garage. So if there's, you know, if it sounds a little different, and now it's stalking you, and of course I made the not so funny joke. I'm like, well, my initials are BBB, so you're not really escaping too much, and you gave me the very pleasant haha.
So in my mind, what this really is, truthfully, what this is me manifesting a bee in front of me so I can confront a fear of like, it's a bee.
Right.
It doesn't get any, and
while
he's just trying
you're
to get
recording.
out the window.
And
Right,
while
so
you're
I can't
recording,
move.
so you need to be on point and really focused.
That's
and
right.
Yeah.
I am.
Well, no, I'm glad to participate in your in moving through your fears here, live and direct,
Yes,
for everyone
thank you.
to be a part of.
We'll see how I react.
Yeah, exactly. If you get stung and then you go into shock or something, then we're gonna all feel really bad.
Just do me a favor. If that happens, put this out as soon as possible so people can get like the full experience. Like, he's still in the hospital. This is still going on.
So Noah, why don't we talk a little bit about? I love. You know, like I said, looking at some of your past guests, you've had some really, really great guests. Some of which I would like to look at bringing on this show.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you give us some ideas? And I know this is kind of a tough question, but some of your favorite guests, or at least ones that stick out? Things that you learned, things that you talked about.
Totally.
Give us a little insight into the Synchronicity podcast cliff notes.
I love this. Well, I do have a tendency for the more recent ones to be excited for those. I mentioned the Jerry Brown one, which will be out, by the time people are hearing this. That's a very cool one. One that really stands out in my mind. Well, there's a few, but one I did with John F. Simon Jr., who is an artist based in Sugarloaf, New York. He was a pioneer in the digital arts realm in the 90s, but has an excellent book called Drawing Your Own Path, which is basically a guidebook on how to use drawing as a mindfulness and awareness practice. And it's incredibly good. It's really just like an amazing method for tapping creativity as an awareness practice. And that conversation that we have in the episode, I think is like, that's the nexus of what it's about. So that one for me in my life, really holds a special practical importance. And I just think he's like the coolest dude. Another one that I really, really enjoy is with Lama Somo, who is a Tibetan Buddhist teacher based in Montana. And she has an organization called Namchak. And she wrote a book called Why is the Dalai Lama Always Smiling? And it's one of the most practical and wise and easy to read books that's kind of an intro and a little bit more into specific Tibetan Buddhist practices, but in a way that's like just so practical and relatable. I mean, she's a Westerner. She's a woman who grew up here, and she just has an incredible way of communicating what's going on. And I just found that conversation to be really, really awesome. There's so many others. A lot of the recent ones in the 80s, a real treat for me. Not the most spiritual per se, because they're not all like that, but I got to interview Tim Heidecker from Tim and Eric, who are just comedic legends to me in terms of how brilliant and hilarious and how much their stuff resonates. So that was a real treat. I really enjoy that one. But man, like I am hard. Here's the honest truth. I have maybe like 3 or 4 that I've recorded over these couple of years that I haven't put out. And those are the only ones that I didn't really, really love. Like anything that goes out, like I 100% stand by. And like we oscillate between what we're particularly interested in at any given time. So, the themes will change over episodes. Magic and astrology over the past 5 or 10 or so have been recurrent themes, but there's been stretches where it's psychedelics and Buddhism and all of these different things. So it's hard for me to pick. They're like kids, but those episodes in particular, really, they always stand out for me as like ones that I love. Oh, and David Nickturns, I'll say, teacher in the Shambhala lineage in New York. Very successful and accomplished and talented musician, but also grew up in Chogyam Trungpa's Shambhala tradition at Naropa, and basically wrote a hit song called Midnight at the Oasis, and basically, gave up all of the glory of being a successful musician to follow this particular lineage, but then found a beautiful way of synthesizing them, which to me is like, that's the coolest fucking thing. So that one also is really good too.
I'm not familiar. Can you tell me a little bit about that lineage? Like what does that entail?
Oh yeah, man. So Chogyam Trungpa was a Tibetan Buddhist teacher who came
familiar with him,
here.
But I don't know a lot about I don't know a whole lot about him other than the
Shambhala,
names and quotes.
Yeah. Okay, so he is just super fucking cool. There's a lot of pictures that are confusing about him. His behaviors were very atypical. There's an excellent documentary, if you want to just get like a quick primer, called Crazy Wisdom, which really encapsulates what this dude was about. He eventually died of alcohol poisoning. He was an alcoholic. He was a womanizer by all accounts, had very interesting, not traditional relationships with people, but was very upfront about all of it, and was also respected and honored as one of the greatest Dharma teachers ever. So he's someone who firmly falls in the realm of the trickster, right? And this is a very interesting character mythology. And they're not stupid, like Loki in Norse mythology isn't like some bumbling idiot, stupid person who maybe is portrayed in movies now, but like very this was a key cog in the mechanisms of the world turning. So that's kind of who Chogyam Trungpa was. He founded a school in Colorado called Naropa, which is still active to this day, and also a lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, which he was a multi-lineage holder. There's a lot of different schools. I think there might be 5 in Tibetan Buddhism, all very detailed. I mean, one of the appealing aspects, I think, to a lot of Westerners of Buddhism is they have lists upon lists and details. It is a very empirical contemplative science. It's not just like some esoteric thing that people tap into. They're very rigorous about how they orally pass certain things down and lineages. But Shambhala essentially translates to like a utopian community. And it's interesting. That's essentially the idea. Some global society, or a society that is able to, co-evolve in harmony with everything around them for the best interests of themselves, which is to alleviate suffering for all sentient beings. That was what Chogyam Trungpa essentially set up. He's one of the most quotable people, has incredible books like Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which is really an important book, and I don't know that it ever won't be. Another book specifically geared towards Westerners called Work, Sex, Money. Because a lot of the time when we're talking about this stuff, esoteric concepts, concepts like compassion, kindness, generosity, all these things, we can get really enticed by these idealistic kind of versions of what this stuff looks like. And in reality, there is no difference between the shitty experience you had with that guy on the road the other day and the most blissed out, amazing awareness experience you're having. So being able to have both of those things be addressed, I think, is paramount. And also just recognizing this is something as Westerners we don't like to hear, but we cannot approach many of these Eastern philosophies and wisdom traditions with the same psychology and psyche as someone who is steeped and grew up with them, especially when we're talking about something like Tibetan Buddhism, which is a particularly isolated area of the world. Like the Chinese didn't get in there until like the 40s. You know what I mean? Like they were totally in this. So for us, and this is something, again, Carl Jung, not to get too off track. Yeah, a bubble. We always approach things from where we came from. And that doesn't mean we can't learn all there is to learn about things, but knowing that we're coming from our own perspective and we can't really ever
replace this for 6 years.
Exactly. That's an important thing. And I think, Chogyam Trungpa specifically was very good at, bridging the gap between what we go through as Westerners in our, material lives and some of these concepts which are transcendent. So someone I love very, very much.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll definitely check out this documentary. That's the probably easiest way to get a download. Yeah, cool.
The easiest way. And then, the book's also amazing.
Very, very cool. So you mentioned that you've had a lot of conversations about magic on your podcast recently. That's that's a good topic. What did you glean from those conversations? Tell us something interesting and magical.
Well, I mean, I think just by talking about something as magic, and there's 2 different ways there's magic with a K at the end of it, which the Jason Louv episode is very much about. And this is using things like sigils and certain ritualistic practices to actually fundamentally change reality by changing our own internal alchemy and consciousness, which I think is really what magic is. When people talk about magic just with a C, I think it has a variety of different meanings, but it usually is something that falls within the metaphysical or paranormal or synchronicity kind of areas. And I think by using a term that is relatively understandable to even like a child, it gives you kind of a template or a launching off point to talk about some of these more, woo-woo things that maybe they are woo-woo, but they still kind of exist. So I love that, magic kind of loosens those boundaries, those liminal boundaries between, logic and reason and kind of mystery, which is where magic lives,
Absolutely. Well, speaking of magic, perhaps it's a good time to hear some magical stories. You better have a synchronicity story or you're fired.
Well, I mean, dude, I have any number ones to choose from. One that always sticks out to me in my mind, that I couldn't shake if I wanted to, is in 2004-ish. I think my chronology is a little weird here. I was at the Omega Institute, which is about 15 minutes away from where I live. It's in upstate New York. A lot of different teachers and people go and speak there. It's a beautiful campus. And I was there for a sound healing class that my mom was like, you should go to this. I was like, okay. So I went and I checked it out. And it was with this dude, Tom Kenyon, who is, speaking of woo-woo, he's out there, but also just totally practical. Had an amazing experience. But there's a library there that's called the Ram Dass Library. And I didn't know who Ram Dass was. What I did know is who Timothy Leary was. And I knew he had a professor with him named Richard Lampert. That's all I knew. So I'll also add to this story that when I first started taking psychedelics, I did a ton of research to try to prepare me for what this was going to be about, my teenage years. And obviously it didn't. I was like, no, but I read a lot of stuff
There's
about
no way
it,
to prepare. Yeah.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please. Great. Used to reading about Jamaica and being in Jamaica. It's like, okay, cool.
Right.
But what happened was I was reading a lot of information, about like MK Ultra, all of these anecdotal stories, all this stuff. And there was one story that always stuck with me to the point where I would actually retell it every experience I ever had with psychedelics, which was this story of this guy going up to India and giving his guru at the time 900 micrograms, which is a very heavy dose of Owsley acid, which is famed as some of the best acid ever created. And essentially the story boiled down. It's a really funny story. I won't go into the whole thing, but it boils down to that it didn't have any effect on him. And the takeaway was essentially that, you can reach these states of consciousness without, other things, and he eventually the story actually got revealed to me much later. So hold that in your head. So I tell this story every single time I'm on psychedelics to all of my friends, just to point out, I don't even know why I'm saying it. So I'm at this Ram Dass library, walking up this staircase, and I see this statue, this white statue of this guy kind of like leaning on his arm in a funny way. And I've never had this reaction before or since, where I stop in my tracks and I go, I know this person. Like, who is this? Like, is this me? I sometimes do that with my arm. Like, who is this? Like, what is this? What the fuck is going on? So I stop. I'm probably looking at this for like 5 minutes. So then I walk up the stairs and sit down on this chair in this library that's upstairs. And I start looking at these pictures. And I don't know who any of these people are. There's like 4 or 5 pictures. And I'm like, I know these people. Who the fuck are these people? Like, what is this? Just very, very weird. So I later learned that the people in the pictures are people like Ramana Maharshi, Sri Ramakrishna, Paramahansa Yogananda, Sri Yukteswar, people who, have names mean things in the kind of Western intersection of mysticism, Vedic mysticism from India. Anyway, so now that's an experience, and that's in 2004. Fast forward to 2013. I had been working with Ram Dass's foundation because I saw a movie called Fierce Grace, which is about Ram Dass, which is a great movie, really, really an emotional, amazing movie. And my friend was like, hey, you should listen to this podcast called Duncan Trussell. And, it's like, all right, I'll check it out. And there's this dude, Raghu, on. And I liked the episode. I got in touch with Love Serve Remember Ram Dass's foundation. I was like, hey, I want to help. I do new media strategy, digital strategy. Let me help you. Built an amazing relationship with them. Found myself down in Maui in 2013. They do these Ram Dass retreats where you actually go. It's an amazing place. Just Maui is, talk about vibes. That place is incredible. And I'm sitting there, and there's this thing called the Hanuman Chalisa, which is I know this is like a super long synchronicity, but it does line up.
No, you know what? It's you go.
Thanks. So there's this thing called the Hanuman Chalisa, which is a 40 stanza, 40 verse chant to a monkey god, which I know how fucking insane that sounds. And that sounds insane to me saying it now. It sounded more insane to me back then. And what ended up happening was I was on Maui. I smoked a little bit of a weed. I went in, sat down in lotus position and listened to this chant. And as soon as I did, I got a striking, never in my life have I had such a psychic impression where I could actually visually see it, an image of a monkey kneeling down before a throne. And I start crying, and I'm not bawling. I'm not like, I'm like, just tears are coming down my eyes. But in a way that I have kind of like two elements of my brain, where there's the intellectual part going like, what the fuck is going on?
Right.
And then there's the other part that's just doing the thing. So I start playing with it. Like, what is going on? Can I turn the image off? Okay, it keeps coming back. I keep, seeing all of these things. So then I'm like, okay, this is one of the weirdest experiences of my entire life. I then really, and I've been working with the Ram Dass Foundation now for like a couple of years, a year and a half or so. I then start looking into this guy, Neem Karoli Baba. I realize, put it all together in that moment, within 5 minutes after that experience, that the guy who I stopped with on the staircase was Neem Karoli Baba. The place was the Ram Dass Library. The story I had been telling my entire life about this guy who took acid and gave it to his guru and it didn't do anything was about Neem Karoli Baba. I'm in Maui with a chant to Hanuman, who is known as a personification of Neem Karoli Baba is a personification of Hanuman. This all just like was a cataclysmic crazy event where I was just like, holy shit, this is the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me amongst a lot of weird things. I don't know how to explain it. From that day on, I learned the Hanuman Chalisa, the 40 verse thing in another language, in Hindi, and I chant it every single fucking day, every single day, because that one just blew, like there's no logical imprint. And since then, obviously, many other things have confirmed this, but it's weird to say I have a guru. Number one, what the fuck is that? B, he's disembodied, right? Doesn't even on this planet anymore. See that I'm not totally insane. That I swear this makes sense. But I have these external synchronicities that lined up in such a beautiful way that, like, even if I wanted to be like, fuck this, I don't believe it, it's like, nah, can't do that anymore. Direct experience trumps any conceptual understanding. So that's the synchronicity for you.
Wow. So that's an awesome story. Thank you for sharing. What is your what is your take on that? Like, so do you feel like there is some level of, that's happening to you, that's not happening to me? Is it because, you have some deeper connection with this character, right? With this.
Totally.
Sorry,
and I'll point out that it's circumvented conscious intellectualizing of this is my guru. This is something that I essentially would have fought as much as I could have conceptually. And this is Ram Dass's famous story about, how he accepted Neem Karoli Baba as his guru, who's another trickster. My favorite mystics all throughout the annals of time and history are all tricksters, pretty much. They defy being pinned down by conventions of how they should act and why they're doing things. And that to me is an amazing energy that is really, a playful, benevolent, loving type of energy. I do think it's a resonance thing. I mean, I like referencing that Vedic astrology thing. One of the things that popped up in it that I thought was interesting is she was like, listen, there's this, I forget which planet it was, but she's like, this is the guru. Notice how literally every single aspect of your chart is in this one area. This likely means that in previous lives, you had some connection to what you're doing and any guru you may have in this life, which to be told that independent of these things was like, okay, yeah, that does. I do begrudgingly accept that is maybe what's going on. Because I can't stress this enough. Like as deep as I am into all this stuff and talking about gurus and psychedelics and all these things, like I'm a Miami Dolphins fan. I like doing regular shit that everyone else does as part of culture too. I like Netflix and Hulu and HBO and all these things. So you got gurus and Hulu. Exactly, Guru and Hulu. There we go. We got a name for our next show, man. But yeah, I do think it's a resonance thing, and I think when the time is right, this is I believe true for psychedelics, for gurus, for any important transitional figures in your life. You are not going to find them. They will find you, and it will make sense when it happens. And if that's not a satisfying thing, and that sounds like, well, sure, he's saying that because he had something I never had. It's like, just know and believe and have faith, which I know is a tricky thing, that when the time is right, you will absolutely get the answers you're looking for.
And when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right?
Exactly.
So what does that entail then? Okay, so you identify yourself as having this guru. So what does that entail for you? How does that affect your life? You've got the chant that you're doing daily.
Well, yeah, I do the daily chant, even sometimes when I don't want to, which in itself, a 40-line chant becomes a mindfulness practice, because what ends up happening is, as you're saying something in another language, you're having 20 other different thoughts as you're doing it. And you're like, oh shit, that's weird. Like, how does that happening that I'm having all of these thoughts and still chanting this thing in another language? From a day-to-day, outside of the chant, that's kind of a reminder. If I get into a sticky situation and I'm praying, I have a guru at this point who I'm happy to, speak to in a way that I think makes sense. I'm not going to ask for like some little thing like, hey, like I'd really
almost like a guardian angel or spirit guide or something.
Very similar. And in the same way, I'm open to all of those energies that, are here to help and guide and support. Like this isn't, I have one and that's it. I also very much identify with the Tibetan Buddhist lineage and do not find any of these things to be mutually exclusive. Padmasambhava, Chogyam Trungpa, I don't consider my guru, but Padmasambhava, I do consider a guru in Tibetan Buddhism. So, these things aren't mutually exclusive. It's a remembrance thing. It's also a template and a way to access certain concepts like surrender and faith and unconditional love in a real way, and also to kind of push you through the spiritual ringer too. Like the community that has surrounded Neem Karoli Baba has often been referred to as dysfunctional, not in like a crippling way, but in a way like you're going to work through your karma pretty fucking quickly. Like the way I would describe it is when you latch onto an energy that's going to be, lifting you up and showing you things, it's like when you go to the airport and you're walking down, the terminal, and then you get on one of those things, the moving walkways, you're getting on a moving walkway and it's going pretty quickly. So just be prepared for that transition and knowing that you're going to be working through some of this shit maybe a little bit more intensely and quickly than you thought you were signing up for. But, day to day, it's not like some crazy thing. I used to wear a pendant around my neck for a year or so with his image, but I don't really totally do the kind of stuff that comes, I don't put on bracelets and necklaces anymore. I don't need that. I think as long as I can remember it, I don't need that functionality that I'm advertising this. And, it's not something I volunteer all of the time, but yeah, it's a part of my life, and I certainly accept it at this point.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point that you make. For me, never having that sort of experience or guru, that I relate to, or, at this point in my journey anyway, that's one thing from kind of looking at it from the outside looking in, is like, it seems like something to be very careful of, where it doesn't turn into sort of like this worship sort of thing where this person is like, needs to be worshipped and they're somehow personality. Right.
Dude, this is such an important thing. And one of the things, let's just be very clear, and we spoke about it a little bit with Chogyam Trungpa, a lot of times these very wise people will come from India and other places, and they really are tuned into something. But what they're not prepared for is young white women throwing themselves at them sexually. And it really fucks a lot of people up and can change the dynamics and some of the wisdom that's being transmitted. And so like the guru worship, I'm lucky in some sense that I had such a direct experience through the synchronicities that I accepted it just fully. Yeah. Right. I can't. I wanted to rail against it, couldn't. But second of all, you don't have a body. You know what I mean?
That helps.
I don't have to go do this stuff. I don't have to, like, you know what I mean? Like, I really had that. And I think anytime you're really worshiping in-body guru, you should be very, very well versed with what that means and what functioning. Like, in Tibetan Buddhism, again, guru yoga is considered like the most accelerated course to enlightenment. So it is a very substantial practice, but it's also fraught with pitfalls and disasters, especially for Westerners, if they just think that it's like, oh, well, this is my guru, I don't have to do anything, they'll take care of it, or I'm super into this, I do whatever this person says. Like, that's Buddha. No one advised doing that. They said, try this shit out for yourself. If it makes sense,
right,
if it works for you, then maybe start believing what I'm saying. But don't just take my word for it. That's not how it works. So,
right.
Yeah, that's a great point,
right.
man. Super, super, super important.
Well, Noah, this has been absolutely fascinating. You are a fascinating character indeed. Certainly worthy of the birthday week crown.
Nice.
Yeah. So I look forward to continuing to collaborate and joining Mindpod Network and coming on your show here in the near future. And the best way for people to connect, of course, through your podcast, I'm assuming, right? What is your website?
Yeah, through my podcast. It's Sync Podcast, SYNC podcast.com. There's Mindpod Network. There's
.com as well.
Those two places. Yeah, exactly. And those places will point you to anywhere you need to go. I'm also on Twitter, but just be warned that when football season rolls around, you will get inundated with Miami Dolphins commentary and spaz out. So,
oh man, well, I might have to chime in and celebrate with you when the Dolphins hit a home run. I'm always that asshole that like comes in and makes a smart ass comment about, oh yay, the team scored a basket, and they're like, dude, this is football.
Sports ball, man.
Sportstering. I was so into it. I was so into sports as a kid, and I played lots of sports, and I remember I would cry. I grew up in Virginia, and Redskins were the team, and I was a Cowboys fan, and they had the big rivalry, and if Cowboys, I remember one time Cowboys losing to Redskins and just bawling my eyes out. And now I look back and I'm thinking, hey, these guys aren't sitting around watching my life making me rich. Like, let me go and go do. It seems to be. But if it's ever on around me, any of it, because I love playing sports, I have always enjoyed them. So if I'm ever happen to be around someone who's watching, sports, it's very easy for me to get sucked in, and so I do enjoy it when I watch it.
So I grew up in the DC area, not to belabor the point here, but I grew up in the DC area.
Near each other then.
Yeah, pretty close. So I think it's hilarious that you're a Cowboys fan in Redskins country. Yeah. Not that it's a bad choice. Just to be clear, Redskins the worst. I'm a Dolphins fan. I grew up there. I know. Trust me. But that's really funny, man.
Yeah. It was a big deal. Well, when I was a kid too, they were both like really good teams, and so it was this huge rivalry. I don't know if it still is, but back in the day, it was definitely a rivalry.
Well,
so
to maybe the Redskins who want to seem relevant, it is. I think Cowboys are just like whatever. Right. Amazing, dude. This is awesome.
Well, you've been incredible to connect with, Noah. I look forward to connecting, as I mentioned, in the future, and continuing to just grow, learn, share through such similar synchronistic circumstances with you. I do have one last question I'd like to leave you with. In this, I always open typically with the same question, end with the same question. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Noah Lampert?
Such a great question, man. Don't start the timer until I start talking. Truthfully, I really just think it's to discover why we're here and to, elaborate just briefly within the 60 seconds. It's to go through the issues, process the things that you are dealing with in a way that helps you, helps everyone around you, and really tap into the meaning of service for the benefit of all sentient beings. That's what it's about.
I agree. I always say, you'll find your purpose through serving others because there are no others. And that's ultimately, it's ultimately the path in some way, shape, or form for all of us. I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Noah. It's been a true pleasure, my friend. Until we connect again, journey well.
You rule. Thank you.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download from our hearts and minds to yours, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes, since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting. Your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.